Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Let's do a controller review. So we've got the new generation of Ultimate controllers from 8BitDo. So they're called the Ultimate 2. And there are a bunch of different versions of this controller, and we'll go over all those options here in this video. Today though, we are going to review the wireless version. So this one is about $60. It works with Windows as well as on Android. Now I've always loved the 8BitDo Ultimate line of controllers. I've made lots of videos about them, but I gotta say that recently I've been using other controllers more, and we're going to talk about that in this video as well in terms of what this new generation brings to the table compared to some of the other competition in the market. Either way, we are definitely going to get into the weeds with this controller review, and so without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, as we get started, I want to do a crash course on how to buy an Ultimate controller from 8BitDo because there are so many different options. And I've even made videos, kind of walking through all the different models. And it's funny because those videos get immediately outdated because they just release new models and then all of a sudden everything's just kind of chaotic again. So at the very least in this video, I'm going to walk you through just some of the parameters you should be looking for when picking up one of these controllers and what the nomenclature will mean for many of them. So we're actually going to go just directly on their website with my tablet PC right here and just kind of take a look at their catalog. And so first things first, you have to remember which platform you want to play on. So they have Xbox related controllers that will work specifically on an Xbox Series console. So that is one option right there. Now everything else will just kind of be in its own little bucket. So if you want to play on PC and then Steam Deck, usually these will kind of go hand in hand. And then also Android and then Nintendo Switch. So let's look at the Xbox model. So we've got one right here. This is the 8BitDo Ultimate 2. And then we have some of the other wired models right here, as you can see as well. Now the thing about these Xbox controllers is that they are all wired. There's no wireless Xbox third-party controller. Even this one that says that it's wireless and doesn't have a wire showing, what that really means is that this one will be wireless when you hook it up to a PC, but you still have to use a wire when connecting it to an Xbox. So that is one thing to think about. If you're going to be using one of these 8BitDo Xbox controllers, it will have to be plugged in. Now for our next grouping of 8BitDo controllers, the ultimate ones here are what they call Bluetooth controllers. And this can be kind of confusing as well. There's the original Ultimate Bluetooth. You have this one, which was a special edition. These ones were also special editions. We've got one that's got like a Nintendo 64 layout. And then we have the new models right here. This is the Ultimate 2 Bluetooth. Now, if we look at say, for example, the Ultimate Bluetooth first generation one right here, this one has multiple different connection options. This thing can connect to Windows via just either plugging it in wired, or you can also use the 2.4 gigahertz dongle, and that's this little USB dongle right here on the bottom of the dock. So the idea is that you can plug this directly into a Windows machine and then connect directly, or you can actually just plug this into the dock and then plug the dock into the computer like this, and then it'll actually connect like that as well. And so that's how you would connect to a Windows PC, and it'll also work with things like the Steam Deck. So that doesn't actually use any Bluetooth connection right there. Instead, the Bluetooth connection is actually made for the Nintendo Switch, and that is why the buttons have the Nintendo Switch layout with the A on the right side. So this one connects like a Nintendo Switch Pro controller and has all the features that you would want with a Switch controller as well, including like gyro and stuff like that. And so essentially that's the main draw of all the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth controllers, is that yes, they can connect to Windows usually via a dongle, and then also they have a Bluetooth capability to connect to Switch. Now, even though these controllers say that they do not connect to Android, they actually do. So you can use the Bluetooth connection to connect to Android as well. It's only going to be picked up as a Switch Pro controller. You can actually see it right there. It said Nintendo Switch Pro controller connected. But it's still a Bluetooth connection, and yes, sure enough, I can start up games like this. The only major difference is that the ABXY pattern is going to follow Nintendo Switch. What this means is depending on how you have your emulators configured, these buttons are going to be all swapped around. So you'll have to go into the emulator and change them. For example, here you can see my A button is actually down here and my B button is up here. And so there are some configurations I would have to do to actually get this to play naturally, but it still will connect and it works pretty well. And so that's the major thing about the Ultimate Bluetooth, is that you can use that Bluetooth connection to connect to things like Android and then of course Nintendo Switch. Now for our next grouping of 8BitDo controllers, this is what they call 2.4 gigahertz controllers. So these ones have a dongle but don't have a Bluetooth connection, even though technically some of them actually do, but that's a whole nother story. And that's what we're reviewing here today, the Ultimate 2 wireless controller, which is the 2.4 gigahertz version. You can see it right there. And then finally, we've got our wired controllers, and these are going to be a lot cheaper. Like I think this one is like $20 maybe, and you can just plug that directly into your PC and then just play from there. So when it comes to buying an 8BitDo Ultimate controller, it really comes down to what platform you're going to play on and making sure that it's all compatible. If you're going to be playing with a Nintendo Switch, then you want the Bluetooth one. If you're only going to be playing on PC and you don't care about Nintendo Switch, then you can use like a 2.4 gigahertz or wireless option instead. And the thing is, each of these have varying price points. The Xbox ones are kind of pricey because they have to pay for that Xbox license. The Bluetooth ones cost more than the 2.4 gigahertz ones. And then of course the wired ones are even cheaper. So to give you an idea in terms of price, the one that we're reviewing here today retails for $60. Now, often you can find it for about $55 on Amazon right now. And also you can find it on AliExpress. They've got an 8BitDo store. So as long as you don't mind getting it shipped over from China, you can save a few bucks that way as well. I'll leave links to all that stuff down below, but this one in particular I just bought on Amazon. At the end of the day, it is very confusing how to pick up one of these controllers and which one is going to be the correct one. In fact, when I bought this one, I didn't realize they were also making a Bluetooth version, and so I thought I was getting the best and latest with this one. Turns out that the Bluetooth one is $10 more, so it's $70, but it has that Nintendo Switch connectivity. So even I, after years of using all of these types of controllers, got duped into buying the wrong one as well. Either way, let's open it up and see what you get inside of the box. So I've been using this thing for about a month, so all I did is just put it back into the box, but obviously you get the controller and the dock, and then we get a little quick start guide. Usually you get like this really long manual, but really it just has this that shows you how to connect to 2.4 as well as how to connect to Bluetooth. And then also we've got a USB cable, so this can be used to connect the dock or just the controller directly. So let's talk about the controller itself and some of the things that have changed with this new generation. Let's start with the analog sticks themselves. These have actually undergone quite a bit of changes since they first released on the first Ultimate controller. The stick itself has not changed too much just in terms of look and feel over the years. It has that same kind of PlayStation cap to it, so it's not concave, it's not convex, it's just kind of slightly bumpy right here. It also has some nice grippiness around the edges, which I've always really appreciated from this company. Now, what has changed with these sticks is the mechanism inside. So this one is using the latest technology called TMR. And TMR stands for tunnel magnetoresistance. And you don't need to know what that actually means in order to actually enjoy this controller. This is what they call an electromagnetic joystick. I've talked about it in my other videos that have TMR joysticks, but essentially this one has the same kind of features and stability of using a magnetic hall sensor, but also has very low power consumption. This means that you'll get longer battery life, but then also it has better compatibility with other controllers. For example, there's a company called GuliKit that makes like drop-in replacements for first-party controllers, like an Xbox controller or PlayStation controller. And that's because the power demand of a TMR joystick is very close to the traditional potentiometer joysticks that you would find in a first-party controller. So TMR joysticks, like we find in the Ultimate 2, are kind of the best of both worlds because they will give you the same sort of accuracy you can get from a Hall sensor, but then also have low power consumption and are swappable with first-party controllers. So there's no real downside to using these types of controllers. About halfway through the first Ultimate generation, they switched over to Hall sensor sticks. And so these ones had a lot of accuracy, but had higher power consumption. So now that we have the TMR joysticks, it kind of feels like we've gone full circle. So long story short, these are excellent joysticks, and they feel a lot like an Xbox controller in terms of layout, but then the tops of them feel like a PlayStation controller. So it's kind of a hybrid experience, but I think they feel very good. They've also got metal banding around the edges here, which gives them a very smooth feeling as you rub them against the sides here. The Ultimate 2 generation of joysticks also has RGB lighting that is customizable. We will test that out later. Now let's talk about the D-pad. This is also something that had a mid-cycle refresh, so this is different than the Ultimate one. So the way that 8BitDo has been describing this D-pad is that it is tactile and clicky but smooth. So the way this works is that as you move this around, it kind of feels like a dome switch connection, like it has a little bit of a click in every direction that you go, and it's also very smooth and easy to touch. It also has a very light travel to it, so you barely have to press it down to actually push it all the way, and it just is very easy to move. It doesn't have the same sort of feeling as a classic controller, like a Super Nintendo controller, like the previous 8BitDo Ultimates, which had a rubber membrane connection. And so this, I would say, is definitely a 21st century style D-pad, where it is very easy to press and feels nice and tight as well. Now, when testing out a D-pad, I usually have 3 major types of games that I like to try out. So let's talk about what I would call precision platformers first. So games like this will include things like Hollow Knight or Celeste. So the idea here is that you want to have pretty precise movements when it comes to, navigating through a 2D environment. And I think this D-pad does a pretty good job because you have that force feedback. Anytime that you actually push in any certain direction, it will click over and let you know where you are. And so personally, I don't have any issues when it comes to navigating around a platformer like this. It gives me enough feedback that I know where I'm going. Now, when it comes to the contra test, this is where I'm looking for accidental diagonals. So the idea here is that in this game, when you duck down, the last thing you want to do is also press a diagonal because that will make your character move. So the way I test this is by pressing down on the D-pad and then rocking it left and right and seeing how much force it requires for me to go from the crouching position to actually moving left or right. And unfortunately, like with some of the other 8BitDo Ultimate controllers that I've tested with this refresh D-pad, it does fail this contra test. It only takes a little bit of thumb movement to make my character move left and right. And that's because it is so easy to actuate this D-pad in one direction or the other. And so even though it is nice that the D-pad can move around very freely, it's a little bit too easy for me. I personally would have liked a little bit more resistance before I get to the actual click. I think that would make this game a lot more enjoyable to play. Now, when it comes to a Street Fighter style fighting game where you want to hit the diagonal, this is actually working out really well. It's a really nice mixture between the somewhat loose feeling of a rubber membrane controller and then the tighter dome switch feeling. It's kind of a middle ground between the two. And so I bet with a bit of acclimation to this type of controller, it would probably become one of my favorite ways to play a Street Fighter style fighting game. So yes, when it comes down to it, I think it's a good D-pad in certain contexts. I don't think it's going to be great for playing games like Contra, but I would definitely be able to play it with something like Celeste, and then obviously a fighting game as well. And then of course, when it comes to modern games, where you're mostly going to be using this to switch out weapons, or maybe use a health pack or whatever you would do in today's style of games, that's not going to be an issue at all because it is very easy to press down, and you know exactly where you're going because you have that forced feedback. So long story short, I think it's a good D-pad, but not really for retro gaming in certain contexts. But the thing is, because of the D-pad positioning and how many people like to play retro games, which means with a D-pad-centric layout, this may not be the best controller option anyway. Okay, now let's talk about these face buttons. So these are very reminiscent of an Xbox controller buttons, but not quite as rounded. So they have a little bit of flatness to them. Again, like with the thumbsticks, they almost feel like a hybrid between a PlayStation and an Xbox controller. The buttons themselves are a little bit clacky. You can probably hear that as I'm pressing it down. But otherwise, yeah, I think they are pretty good buttons. They have a nice, pretty tight feeling. Like they're kind of firm in the shell, but still easy to press down on. And they are rubber membrane. So they do definitely remind me of an Xbox Series controller. Okay, let's talk about these front buttons. So these are all somewhat clicky and still a little bit soft, but you can definitely hear them. So we've got select and start up here up top. Then we've got our home button in the center. So as you're playing, this will bring up like the Xbox menu. Then we have what they call the square button, and then finally their star button. The square button is used to assign some of these extra buttons. We've got 2 right here and then 2 on the back. So you'll use a combination to set those. We'll do that in a moment. And then also the star button is used to do things like turning on turbo for these buttons. And it also is used to adjust the RGB lighting. So for example, right here I'm connected up. You can see I've got the default RGB on. So it's going to be light blue. And then when you press the joysticks, you can see there's a little bit of purple that's following the joystick direction. And it's actually showing on the other joystick at the same time, as you can see. Same thing with if we press a button, you can see that it'll actually light up a color depending on the button that you're pressing on this right analog stick. So this is one of the color functions that they have within the RGB lighting. And so if you don't want what they call the light tracing mode, you can press the start button and go into different options. So this one is one that they call the fire ring mode. And you can see that it just kind of cycles around with these like more, red style colors. If we press it one more time, it'll just give us a solid color. You can see that by default, it has this kind of bright orange. So first thing you could do is you can press and hold the start button and then go up and down to increase and decrease the brightness of the RGB lights. So that's one thing that you can do just right off the bat. In addition, you can do star and left and right to adjust the color. So if you want a different color option, you can just kind of cycle through them. We don't have a ton to choose from. It's basically like 5 different color modes, and that's it. And that's about all you can do directly on this controller for the lighting options. There are more you can do in the 8BitDo software, which we'll do in a moment. Before that, let's check out some of these other buttons. So we'll talk about these shoulders and triggers next. So the shoulders have definitely been updated since the previous model. They are now a lot clickier, and this is one of those things where they probably put in a micro switch connection, or maybe made it less dampened. But essentially, it's a lot easier to press down on now. And yeah, it's a little bit clicky as well. Personally, I don't really mind it. I think it actually feels pretty good, but it is a little bit louder than I would like. The nice thing is that it's very easy to press down on these. And so it's one of those where it kind of reminds me of an Xbox controller again, because these are also easy to press on an Xbox Series controller. Behind that, we've got the trigger buttons, which I've always felt have a PlayStation 4 DualShock design. And no complaints there. I actually think it's a pretty nice design altogether. I like that it has just the right amount of gradient right here to allow you to rest your index fingers on it. It feels really natural. Now, one thing that has been updated with these new models is we have these hair trigger switches, so we can turn those on, and now it only goes this far. This is as far as the button goes, and it goes from 0 to 100%, so it's a digital input. This is going to be great for certain types of games, like a shooter, where you just need to press it down to fire. You don't need to press it down all the way. This will make it a lot faster. And then, of course, you can switch it over when you want to play something like a racing game, where you want to treat this like a gas pedal. Now, between the shoulder and trigger, we have what they call like L4 and R4, so these are additional buttons that can be programmed. So the way this works is you press and hold whatever button you want to program, then you press whatever button you want it to become, and then you press the square button. And so the combination of all three will confirm it. So for example, if I wanted R4 to be the A button when I pressed it for whatever reason, you would press and hold this, then press the square button and the A button at the same time. And you'll get an LED light confirmation when it actually works. So now I can press and hold it. You'll see it flashing on and off. That means that, yes, it's now pressing the A button for me. And to unpair, all you do is you press this button and then the square button on its own, and that's it. So now it's not paired to anything. You can also do the exact same thing with these two back paddles. So these can be assigned to whatever, and I actually use these ones pretty often. So generally what I like to do is I like to make this button my jump button, and then this button my reload button when playing a game like Destiny. So that means I want to assign it to A and then X for this one on the left. So again here, I'm just going to press and hold this button, press the A button and square, and we are good to go. So now when I press that back button, you can see the LED is lighting up. So this now will jump anytime I play a game like Destiny 2. Additionally, on the back, we've got our toggle for 2.4 gigahertz and then also Bluetooth, and then we have our pin connectors for that dock. And that's a quick walkthrough of everything that's available on this controller. So we've got 4 different programmable buttons, and then everything else is kind of standard. Now, in terms of plastic texture, it has a hard texture to it, so just a nice hard plastic. And then on the back, we do have this slightly grippy texture, as you can see, but it's also a hard plastic as well, so it's not rubbery. And I actually prefer this because I feel like rubbery controllers start to break down over time. This one feels like it's going to last a lot longer. And the texture is somewhat matte on the front as well. It feels very good in the hand, so not slick or anything. Now, in terms of just overall ergonomics, it's very similar to an Xbox controller. You can see that naturally you're going to have those offset thumbsticks, and it is rounded in all the right places, so it feels very good. As far as the grip, it's also pretty comfortable. What I typically will do is just kind of have it like this. So the pinky is down on the bottom, then my ring finger, middle finger up above the paddle, and then of course I'm resting on the trigger button with my index finger, and that's a pretty comfortable way of holding it. It's basically the exact way that I hold an Xbox controller. So it's really going to come down to the type of player that you are. I personally like to play Xbox style, so no issues for me. But if you are more of a like DualShock or DualSense person where you want to have 2 analog sticks here on the bottom, then you'll probably want to shop around for something else. Now let's talk about this dock and how the entire setup works. And essentially this is the same as the previous generation dock with a couple key upgrades. So number one, the way that you connect it is that you just put the controller right on top. It's going to set right in place. Everything is nice and seamless in terms of the connection here, and it'll connect between the pogo pins and the connectors. And the idea here is that if you wanted to charge this controller in the dock, then all you have to do is just connect the dock to something via USB, either just directly to a power source like a USB adapter or into a PC, which I think is probably the better fit. So all you have to do is just plug this in and it'll start to charge the controller. You can see that the light right here will come on, the charging indicator, and also the dock down below has a little LED light. It's kind of hard to see, but it'll light up as well. And so it gives a nice little ambient look to it. But the real kicker of a setup like this is that when plugged into a PC, it will actually just connect to the controller when you take it off the dock. So what happens here is that when you pull it off the dock, it's just going to immediately turn on and then connect to the 2.4 wireless dongle that is inside of the dock right here. And so essentially the signal is coming from the USB port on your computer through the dock and then into the dongle itself, which means that it's just a single cable solution when connecting it to a computer. So the idea here is that you can just play it like this. When you're done, you put it away and that will charge the controller. And then from there, you pick it up again, it's going to connect and you can just start playing like that. And So a really easy setup, and I really just like how simple and intuitive everything is. Now, of course, you don't need to use this dock if you don't want to. You can actually just plug this directly in via the USB dongle, and this has been upgraded. It's now a USB-C dongle instead of just regular USB-A. And so the idea with this is that you would just plug this directly into the computer, and then you would turn your controller on. It's just going to connect wirelessly instead. And so everything works very easily this way as well, but you don't have the added features of being able to, set it down and charge it when you're not using it. Of note, the 2.4 gigahertz dongle now is 1000 hertz. It used to be 250, so it's now 4 times faster and more stable than it was with the previous generation. So that is a pretty big upgrade. And so this whole dock setup has always been one of my favorite aspects of the 8BitDo Ultimate controllers. The fact that I just have to use one single USB cable, connect it to my computer, and then I could just pull this thing off anytime I'm ready to play, and it's instantly available. I've always loved that connection. Now, when it comes to connecting to Windows, super easy, as I've shown already. So just connect it to the dongle or the dock, and then, turn on your controller, make sure it's in 2.4 gigahertz mode, and essentially that is it. It'll just instantly start working. And so that's how I usually will have it set up on Windows. Now, when it comes to the Steam Deck, it's also a very simple process. Just throw in the dongle, and yes, it'll connect just fine. But there are a couple caveats. For example, you're not able to map like the L4 and R4 buttons, as well as the back paddles in Steam Input just yet. This is something that Valve would have to fix in their software side, or maybe 8BitDo, I'm not really sure, but usually it's Valve that makes those kinds of changes. But as it stands, is just using it as a regular old controller without those additional inputs, yeah, you're going to be able to use this just fine. But you'll have to program these buttons on your own as opposed to using them with Steam Input. So using that square button like we were showing earlier to map them to whatever else, you can totally do all that stuff. You just can't make them a special button in Steam Input. Now, one thing you could do is put this in Bluetooth mode and then connect it wirelessly with no need for the dongle. However, that limits your support altogether. At that point, you're going to lose some features like rumble and gyro, as well as the ability to set custom RGB. However, there are people on Reddit who have made posts showing that you can then use these controllers mappable within Steam Input. So you kind of have to make a decision. Do you need Steam Input, or do you want to have things like gyro and rumble? Now, when it comes to connecting to Android, I'm just going to use my Odin 2 portal right here. All you have to do is just turn it over into Bluetooth mode here, then turn it on, and then press and hold the pairing button for a moment. After a bit, it's going to flash really quickly like this. So then what you would want to do is go into your settings, connected devices, pair new device, and then find your controller right there, 8BitDo Ultimate 2 Wireless. We're going to hit pair, and that's it. We are now all set up. So now I can go into like Emulation Station and then start browsing through my games. Just be aware, if you're going to be playing it with like Android in particular and trying to play it with emulators, you'll have to remap some of these emulators. For example, the Nintendo GameCube one, Dolphin, that one will require a custom profile so that you're not using, for example, the built-in controls on the Odin 2 portal. However, when you're talking about a system that you would play via RetroArch, for example, Final Burn Neo, this will work out just fine. It'll depend on the console that you're using. For example, here, with this kind of setup, it's going to treat the Odin 2 portal as player 1, and then this guy as player 2. And you can always configure that in the settings, or you can even just turn off the controls on a device like this. You just go to control style and then disconnect. And like I mentioned before, this unfortunately does not work with the Nintendo Switch. Even in Bluetooth mode or trying to use the dongle, none of those will work. You can see here I'm trying to pair. Nothing's being picked up by the Nintendo Switch, unfortunately. So if you are looking to play with Nintendo Switch, you'll have to pay an additional $10 to get the Bluetooth version, which I think is probably going to be the better fit anyway because of the ABXY layout. Now, in addition to being able to program all of the buttons and whatnot directly on the console, you can also use the 8BitDo Ultimate software, which you can get directly from their website. So you'll need the version 2 one for this 8BitDo 2. And there are a couple things that you can do here. Number one, you can go in and update the firmware. So I'm already in the most recent version 1.03, but this is where you will do the update. In addition, you can set up profiles. I didn't mention it before, but we've got these 3 little dots right here in this button. So you can actually make 3 different controller profiles depending on what you want. So the way this works is you'll go into the profile section and then you can create your own. You can either make a new one. You can see I have one here named Russ, or you can just, change it to whatever, and you can have 3 going at once. You've got a lot of things that you can change. For example, any of these buttons can be remapped to something else. For example, you want the Y button to be the X button. You can change out your ABXY pattern directly in the software. software. In addition, on the back, you can just manually configure all of your options here. So you can see that I've made L4 and R4 to be my L3 and R3 buttons, and then I've done my same standard A and X here for reload as well as jumping. You don't have a ton of options when you click on these. It's essentially just all the buttons that are already available on the controller. However, you do have a macro function. So within here, you can set any of these buttons to be just a full-on series of different inputs. And so if you're playing a game like, I don't know, like a real-time strategy game where you need to press a certain combination of buttons, you can just assign this to one of the back buttons instead, and it'll press multiples at once. Now further down, we can test these sticks. So couple things here. Number one, you can obviously just see whether or not they feel okay, but you can change the range of motion. So right now I've got it just set to the default settings, but for example, if I didn't want to press all the way to get to 100%, say I only wanted to press like that far, all I would have to do is just reduce this number right here. And so now it's going to get to 100% by only pressing it about 50% of the way there. So that's going to give me a lot faster input. At the same time, if I want a dead zone, say for example here, I want to be able to push it quite a bit before it even registers, then I can adjust it on this end. So now I have to press it all the way here just to even get it to start going. Further down, we've got a couple other options like being able to invert the axes on their own or maybe swap them left and right, whatever you actually would prefer to use. Now, when it comes to the triggers, a very similar setup. So we can test them and make sure they're going down all the way 100%, or we can also adjust these as well to make them more sensitive. So now I only have to press it that far to actually get to 100%. Under the vibration section, we have the ability to adjust the rumble, and we've got basically 5 different presets here. Personally, I don't like to have a lot of strong rumble, so I just have it set to 1, but you can obviously change that to whatever you'd like. Bear in mind, the rumble motors are down here, so they're not up in the triggers, and so what you can do is actually press the L and R triggers, and it'll actually start rumbling. So right now I'm feeling the rumble, and yeah, the left side is a lot more powerful right now. Next, we have the RGB settings. So here we can actually turn it on. It says close, that means off. Bad translation, but you can do what they call light tracing like we were talking about earlier, when as you move it, it'll actually change the color. So you can see that here. Now underneath, we can change the colors for each of these. So right now it has the tracing RGB. So that's going to be the color that actually shows up as you're moving it around. You can see it's like a light purple, and that's what it's set up right here. We can also go and change the background RGB. So right now it's a light blue, but I could change it to something else if I would like. In addition, we have like the fire ring, so we can adjust the speed and the colors and whatnot if you want to have something that's actually rotating. And then finally, we have the custom option, which is where we can put individual colors. Now the next section is the gyro. So essentially what we can do here is if we turn it on, we can adjust it to either be the left or the right analog stick. So say for example, I set it to the right stick, and then here it's going to say what button do you want to actually have it go into force. So for example, if I say press to hold to enable, and then I change that to the left trigger. What this means now, set to right stick, is when I pull on the left trigger, that means it's going to function as the right stick when I move the controller around. And so essentially when you're playing a first-person shooter game, that means that when you're aiming down the sights, that's when you can actually adjust your controls with gyro instead. So it's all built into the software in the controller itself. So that's pretty handy. And that means that, when playing a Windows game, for example, when X input does not have gyro input, you can kind of force it this way instead. It's not going to be perfect. It's kind of a software workaround, but it is nice that you can easily set that up and then save it on a per profile basis. And so really that's about it when it comes to the software. You have the ability to map things around and whatnot. And I like the fact that you don't actually have to use this software for many of the functions. You can just do it directly on the console. For example, changing your RGB lights or mapping any of these buttons however you would like. You're only really going to need the software if you want to do like a macro or maybe some custom RGB or setting up your motion controls. After that, you don't ever really need the software again. Okay, so we've gone over basically everything that you can do with this controller. Let's now talk about, just my quick summary of what I like and what I don't like about the 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless controller. Number one, I like the look and feel of this controller. I've always found it to be fairly ergonomic with an Xbox style layout that also is just really comfortable in the hands. I also appreciate that they've upgraded to TMR joysticks. I think that's going to give us a lot of good accuracy. It's going to minimize things like stick drift, and also because it's low power consumption, that's going to be a great experience. experience as well. The battery life on this is also pretty good. It's not something I mentioned before, but it's got a 1000 milliamp hour battery and gives you about 20 hours of playtime, and I found that to be very true. It's one of those things where long battery life is actually not a huge issue for me anyway, because this is a dockable solution. So really, once you have it hooked up, you can just plop it right onto the dock. It's going to charge and be ready the next time you're ready to play it. Now, constantly charging the controller will probably eat away at its battery life a little bit faster than if you only charged it when you needed it, but I think that the convenience is well worth it. I also appreciate that this is a very tailored experience. We've got a lot of customizable buttons, and it's pretty easy to make a lot of those customizations directly on the controller. For everything else, they have their own software, which is pretty darn easy to use. And then finally, this one is kind of on a positive and also a negative in that we have a very tailored experience. If you are only looking for a controller to use on your Xbox, or maybe you're only looking for just PC gaming, or you want something that's specifically made for Switch, you've got all those different options to choose from, and so you don't have to buy extra features that you don't want. However, that also leads into some of the things I don't like about this controller, and number one is that the catalog for the 8BitDo Ultimate line is super confusing. I've been using these types of controllers forever, and I find it hilarious that I bought the wrong controller because I was myself confused about which one I was supposed to buy. So hopefully the crash course we did earlier in this video will put you on the right path to get the right controller, but it kind of sucks that it's so confusing in the first place anyway. I'd really love to see some sort of chart on the 8BitDo website that would make this a lot easier to walk through. And then finally, my other nitpick about this controller is that the D-pad is not great in certain contexts. When it comes down to it, the majority of games that I played were just fine, especially modern games, but certain elements, like playing a game like Contra, definitely showed that this is a little bit too sensitive of a D-pad for me. I don't think it's going to be a deal breaker for most gamers, but for those who play a lot of retro games like me, I would rather use a different controller. Now, speaking of different controllers, I did want to talk about a couple other options that are definitely something worth considering if you are thinking about getting the 8BitDo Ultimate 2, because they're not the only player on the block. Number one, I'd recommend checking out the GameSir Cyclone 2. I just recently did a video about it. I will leave it linked down below. This is definitely a more PC-oriented controller. It has its own dock, which I'm not a huge fan of just in terms of overall design, but I really love the controls on this one. We've got a very Xbox-style layout, including the controller design right here, and it also has a hair trigger switch here on the bottom. In addition, we've got TMR joysticks, some pretty nice RGB lighting, and then really nice and clicky, precise controls. So both the D-pad and the face buttons are micro switches. They feel great. In addition, this one is cheaper. It's $50 compared to $60, and this one has more functionality. This one will work with Nintendo Switch. And so this is one definitely still worth checking out as well, and honestly, between the two, I still prefer the GameSir. The only thing I don't like about the GameSir is the look of its dock compared to the one on the 8BitDo, which is a little bit more seamless. Now, another controller that I've been testing at the same time as the 8BitDo, but I think I need to save it for a different video, is the GameSir Supernova. I've also been testing this one at the same time. I don't want to give too many spoilers about the video just because I think this will be an exciting one as well, but it is very similar to the 8BitDo, but has some key upgrades. Number one, it's got a really nice dock to it that looks a lot more sleek than the one on the Cyclone 2, and the dock itself also has this RGB lighting that kind of goes hand in hand with the controller itself. I think that's pretty cool. In addition, it's got swappable faceplates, it's got full Nintendo Switch functionality. There's a lot of nice features with this one as well. Like with the Cyclone 2, this one is only $50, so it is about $10 cheaper than the Ultimate, and then also $20 cheaper than the Ultimate Bluetooth, which actually has the same amount of features. So this one is quite a bit cheaper and still a very good time. So be on the lookout for this controller review. I am totally overdue in making that video. I will probably get to it next week. So when all is said and done, I do like the 8BitDo Ultimate 2. It's a good controller, and I think it is well worth the $60 price point. The only time that I start to feel that maybe it's not good enough for me is when I look at the other options in the market, because there are cheaper controllers that I like better. However, if you like this 8BitDo style, maybe you tried the first Ultimate controller and you've always wanted to have additional macro buttons, or maybe you wanted to have TMR joysticks, all those are excellent upgrades. I do think it's a good controller in certain contexts. For example, for PC gaming, you want to have the dock right there. You can plop it on there. It's going to charge up. You pull it off. It's going to be fully charged and ready to go. You don't have to do any sort of additional configuration with Bluetooth or anything else like that. And so in those contexts, yeah, I think it's pretty good, but it's just not my ideal PC controller right now. And so it does leave me in a bit of an awkward position where I think it's a good controller. 8BitDo didn't do anything wrong in making this thing. I mean, I've got a couple nitpicks about the D-pad, but otherwise I think it is an excellent built controller, and it's crazy that we have this much value at this price point. But it also just so happens that there are other companies making excellent controllers as well, and so I do recommend shopping around before picking this one up. Either way, let me know what you think of the 8BitDo Ultimate Controller in the comments down below. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.